when you apply force to a small area of basically a liquid medium, the glass, all these flinty rocks, obsidian, glass are solids, but they sort of behave like liquids in a weird sort of way that if you apply force, you get a little compression right there, and that little ring of compression starts a ring crack. And just like dropping a pebble into a pond where you get concentric rings coming out from it, it propagates in a similar kind of way, so that that ring crack will sort of spread out at roughly a 60-degree angle through here. And this is just the ideal situation for this. Now, if you take a piece of flint and whack it in the middle, you can get the same sort of thing happening in it, but the mass of a piece of flint or obsidian or something is usually such that you don't punch a cone out the other side. It just usually causes a ring-shaped crack or a cone-shaped crack in your rock that you're going to find later when you're chipping back through it. But what we're doing when we're flint knapping is we're trying to sort of, once you understand this is a controllable and predictable thing, when you're flint knapping, what you're doing is you're actually controlling the angle and geometry of one of these in a fairly predictable medium, such as glass, flint, obsidian, etc. And I took a hammer stone, for instance, and just popped that right in the middle. I'm going to get one of those ring cracks, and there's going to be a Hertzian cone try to form. But again, that's mostly ruinous to your rock. If you go out with a sledgehammer and start beating on pieces of flint trying to crack them in two, you're probably just going to ruin that rock for anybody else who comes along, because you're going to have all these cone fractures inside that thing. But imagine that, okay, we do that, we're going to get one of those Hertzian cones. But if we come over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to get a Hertzian cone on that edge. But what's going to end up happening is that a flake broke right there, but I think it's worth talking about. What's going to happen is we're going to end up with a portion of that. And what we're trying to do, a good way to think about this is if you have a cone-shaped item, sort of projected off the end of your hammerstone, and if you imagine that thing, sort of been permanently stuck out there like a photon collector on the USS Enterprise or something like that. When you come down on this thing, imagine how that inner part of that cone shape is going to interact with the stone right here. And that's exactly what I did just a minute ago, is I came down on here, and every flake you create, especially if it's intact, is going to have a little remnant of that cone. And what you want to do, if you notice flint knappers, we very seldom come straight down on the edges. We're often, when we're working on stuff, you will see some very weird, very low angle approaches to try to get that cone to propagate just under the surface of the stone. When you start trying to thin a biface, and a biface is an all-purpose word for most of the arrowhead-like things. This is a biface fragment that I created yesterday as it broke in two from a piece of toilet tank porcelain right here. And your biface is basically meaning, arrowhead or projectile point. To get those things thinner in the middle quicker than you make them small around, you have to learn how to kind of modulate some of the angles for this sort of thing. So a lot of times when you watch flint knappers, they're not hitting into the rock. They're sort of dragging away from that edge, or that platform as we call it. And oddly enough, a lot of times when you're doing that, there you go. Alright, so I struck down like that, but that flake, such as it is, it's not a great flake, but it will do for our purposes, it traveled the other direction, but that's still just a variation on trying to control some of the angle and geometry of that cone of force, or Hertzian cone as we refer to it. And there's not a whole lot of topography right in here, and I think if you, and the weird thing here is I wouldn't even do any platform prep because it's naturally blunted for you right there. I mean, that little edge right there is not going to, that thing's not going to come apart no matter what right there, I don't think. That roundness, a lot of times when you see people prepping the platform, what they're actually trying to do, if you notice, I don't necessarily grind like that. I grind down, and what that does is that kind of slightly rounds the face right there, and there's a lot of strength and curvature. There's the old trick about you can't take a chicken egg and break it with your fingers by mashing it on the long axis like that. That's because that curvature imparts strength to it. And we're doing exactly the same thing when you're, it doesn't have to be curved down here, but that little bit of curvature up here gives that flake enough strength so that when you hit it, it kind of springs, it compresses just a little bit, and it'll kind of launch that energy all the way down the face of your core. So, all right, wow, that's a big old flake. Okay, you reach back and grab a little more, but that's okay. We might even be able to use this as a core now. So, two cores. And that's what they say, you break a big old arrowhead, you got two little arrowheads, right? So, you're good to go. Big one. Yep.
So I can definitely make a nice piece out of that, and maybe several pieces out of that.